Breaking, Diddy's former assistant just took the stand, and what she said sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Once dubbed a trusted aide, she's now clarifying damning allegations that tie Diddy to covert operations and cross-border dealings. The term drug mule wasn't just thrown around, it was dissected, redefined, and redirected in real time. This testimony could flip the entire case on its head. It was just after 9 a.m. when the courtroom door creaked open and Camille Jordan stepped inside. All eyes turned. Reporters, federal agents, courtroom sketch artists, and even the judge appeared momentarily transfixed. She walked with a composed, deliberate pace, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that clung to professionalism but couldn't hide the tension etched across her face. For years, Camille had been a background fixture in Diddy's empire, a ghost in luxury corridors, whispered about but never heard. Now, under oath, she was the headline. Judge Mallory Whitaker, a no-nonsense figure with a reputation for firm control, cleared her throat as Camille reached the witness stand. The room held its breath. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but the energy was electric. Outside, a fleet of media vans lined the courthouse steps, and Twitter was already ablaze with hashtags like #CamilleTestifies and #DiddyTrial. "Raise your right hand," the bailiff instructed. "I do," Camille said firmly after the oath was read, voice trembling ever so slightly. Prosecutor Megan Avery approached first. Her tone was measured, professional, but it was clear she understood the weight of her star witness. She started slow, background questions, Camille's professional timeline, her recruitment into Combs Enterprises back in 2015. Camille confirmed she was originally hired as a travel coordinator but had quickly been promoted to Diddy's personal executive assistant due to her efficiency and loyalty. "Ms. Jordan," Avery said, "you held that role until when?" "Until December 2020, Camille replied. "And during that time, would it be fair to say you had near-daily access to Mr. Combs?" "Yes," she answered. "I coordinated his travel, managed his appointments, handled sensitive logistics, and facilitated, at times, his personal dealings." A murmur rose in the courtroom, and Judge Whitaker raised a hand. "Let's keep reactions to a minimum. This is a court of law." Avery nodded and continued. "We will return to those personal dealings shortly, Ms. Jordan. But for now, can you describe the kind of responsibilities you had that went beyond a typical assistant's role?" Camille hesitated only slightly. "I was expected to manage confidential documents, arrange off-book meetings, transfer cash internationally, and, on more than one occasion, travel with sealed containers or packages that I was told not to open or question." Gasps filled the courtroom. Even the stenographer blinked, slowing for a split second. But before Avery could push further, the defense objected. "Your Honor," said Charles Brenner, Diddy's lead counsel, rising with the flair of a seasoned trial lawyer. "This witness has a history of contractual violations and breaches of non-disclosure agreements. Her testimony is tainted, speculative, and in some cases, likely retaliatory." Judge Whitaker looked up over her glasses. "Mr. Brenner, you'll have ample time for cross-examination. Objection overruled, for now." The prosecution resumed, more delicately this time. "Ms. Jordan, did you ever sign any legal documents that restricted what you could say about your time with Mr. Combs?" "Yes. 3 NDAs. "And why are you breaking them today?" Camille took a breath. "Because I was told that if I didn't, people would get hurt. I was told things that haunt me. And because this isn't just about contracts anymore, it's about the truth." Across the room, the defense team scribbled notes furiously. Brenner leaned in and whispered something to his co-counsel, who nodded grimly. They knew Camille was hitting harder than expected, and early. Outside the courthouse, news anchors were already breathlessly summarizing the first 30 minutes of testimony. Inside, the weight of Camille's words began to settle over the jury like fog. Avery continued, shifting the timeline. "Let's talk about your work during 2018 to 2020. Did anything change in terms of what was expected of you?" "Yes," Camille nodded. "There were more special assignments. More last-minute trips. Fewer written instructions. Everything was verbal." "Did you ever feel unsafe?" Camille's lips tightened. "Yes." Avery paused. "Can you elaborate?" "There were times I was asked to carry items I didn't understand. I was told not to speak to airport security unless absolutely necessary. I was told to use private terminals and, on at least one occasion, to cross a customs checkpoint using an alternative VIP access lane with someone else's credentials." The gallery behind the prosecution visibly stiffened. That revelation, unauthorized border activity, would draw federal attention beyond just the scope of this trial. The defense again objected, citing speculative testimony and lack of corroborating documentation. "Mr. Brenner," Judge Whittaker warned, "you're approaching the line. Sit down." Reluctantly, Brenner obeyed, but the smug smirk he wore suggested he was saving ammunition for later. Camille remained collected. Avery ended the first round of questions with a final, loaded one. "Why are you here, today, under oath?" Camille looked down for a second, then met Avery's gaze, and then the jury's. "Because I stayed silent too long. Because I told myself I was just an assistant, not a part of anything shady. But silence is complicity. And I've seen things that, if I keep to myself, make me part of the lie." A hush. The judge adjourned the court for a short recess. As Camille stepped down, reporters bolted from the room to file breaking headlines. Phones lit up. Threads exploded. Diddy, notably absent from the courtroom that day, would no doubt be watching from somewhere else, his defense team preparing for a vicious counterattack. But for now, Camille Jordan had the room. And her spotlight was just beginning to burn. When the court resumed after the recess, the tone had shifted. The murmurs from earlier were now gone, replaced by a quiet, taut expectation. Camille Jordan returned to the witness stand with a cup of water in hand and a look that was less anxious than before, still intense, still careful, but with a growing sense of purpose. This was not just testimony anymore. It was theater, and the room knew it. Prosecutor Megan Avery stood again, this time holding a printed transcript of text messages that had already caused a stir behind the scenes. "Ms. Jordan," she began calmly, "I'd like to direct your attention to a particular message exchange that occurred on April 14, 2019. Do you recall this text to Mr. Derek Vaughan, an associate of Mr. Combs?" Camille nodded slightly, adjusting the mic. "I believe so." For the record, Avery read, "You said, quote, I've got the mule bag. Everything's wrapped and pre-cleared. We'll hand off after wheels down. Unquote. Can you explain what you meant by that message?" The courtroom leaned in, breath held. Camille blinked once. "Yes. The term mule bag was something we used internally. It did not mean drugs, as people seem to believe. It referred to the standard black duffel we used for sensitive materials, documents, burner phones, encrypted hard drives, or stacks of cash that couldn't go through normal channels." Avery raised an eyebrow. "So the word mule was figurative?" "Yes. It was shorthand. Industry slang. It meant someone was transporting something discreetly and off the books, but not necessarily illegally." The defense chuckled. Charles Brenner stood. "So we're now supposed to believe the assistant who used the word mule didn't mean what the entire world understands that word to mean." Judge Whittaker cut in, sharp as a blade. "Mr. Brenner, save it for cross. Sit." He obeyed, but with a smirk that didn't hide his contempt. Avery continued. "Ms. Jordan, you mentioned transporting sensitive items. Can you list some of those specifically?" "Yes. I carried a biometric scanner used for digital safes, a folder of original song contracts worth millions in royalties, and once, a bag containing roughly $40,000 in cash for a payment that had to be made discreetly to an international party. I didn't always know who it was for, but I knew better than to ask." "And these errand runs, were they local?" "No," Camille said, more confidently now. "They were global. I flew to Paris, Dubai, Turks and Caicos, Tokyo, and even Morocco, all under short notice. Always for logistics. Always with the mule bag." "Were these trips documented through the company's books?" Camille shook her head. "No. They were private bookings. Usually under an alias, once under the name Sasha Green. I wasn't even Camille Jordan on half my boarding passes." The revelation hit like a wave. The jury whispered among themselves before a glance from Judge Whittaker silenced them. Avery used the moment to hold up a travel itinerary logged under Sasha Green, showing departure and arrival points that matched Camille's recollection. Matching them to private jet logs later would be easy. "Did you ever knowingly transport illegal substances?" Avery asked directly. "No," Camille said without hesitation. "I never saw, touched, or moved anything that was clearly illegal. But I was often left in the dark about what I was handling. And when I asked, I was told, you don't need to know. Just do your job." The prosecution let that statement hang in the air. Across the courtroom, journalists began typing frantically, many pulling up screenshots from earlier leaked messages, many of which had been circulating in Telegram groups and forums for months. Now, Camille was confirming the content and recontextualizing it. Avery pulled up another message. This one, dated September 9th, 2020. You texted, "The phones are in. Blacked out. I wrapped them and wiped the IMEIs. We'll drop them with K. Can you explain that?" Camille didn't flinch. The phones referred to prepaid burners. I was given a new batch every few months to deliver to certain contacts. I had a tool to erase all identifying information, including the IMEI numbers, so they couldn't be traced. Kay was a runner in Atlanta who handled street-level logistics. Another eruption of noise. The judge didn't scold this time. She just watched Camille carefully. Were these instructions coming from Mr. Combs directly?
Avery asked softly. Camille hesitated. Sometimes yes.
Sometimes through his circle, his attorney, his head of operations, or his driver. The mention of a driver raised eyebrows, hinting at a wider network. But Avery smartly didn't chase that, yet. "What changed, Ms. Jordan?" she asked. "Why speak now?" Camille looked down for a second, then back up. Because the media was already twisting it.
Making me look like I was trafficking drugs across borders.
That's not what I did.
That's not who I am.
But if I stay silent and let them run with that narrative, then I let the truth die in favor of a better headline. Avery nodded, then turned toward the judge. No further questions at this time.
Brenner immediately stood.
"Let's talk about those texts, shall we?" he said, stalking slowly toward Camille like a stage actor playing a villainous lawyer. "Ms. Jordan, do you consider yourself well-versed in legal language?"
Camille tensed.
"No, not legally trained." "Then why use a term like mule, which you now claim was completely innocent?"
"It was industry slang," she said again. "A term we used.
It didn't mean drugs to us."
"To you maybe,"
Brenner said,
circling.
"But to the public?
To this jury? It's a criminal label. Did you use it for attention?
Or maybe, insurance? Something to hold over Mr. Combs in case things went south?"
No.
No.
Brenner leaned in.
"Then why did you refer to the bag you carried as the Mule bag in over 12 separate messages, many of which were sent to individuals under federal investigation?" "I didn't know they were under investigation," she snapped, losing composure for the first time. "And yet you kept carrying bags for them."
A pause. "I was following orders," she said quietly. A moment passed.
Then Brenner dropped the page he was holding and returned to his desk without another word.
Camille's eyes glistened. She reached for the water again. The court recessed for lunch.
Outside, the internet was already ablaze again. Influencers were dissecting every word of Camille's mule bag clarification. News headlines were split, some siding with her, others mocking the explanation. But inside that courtroom, the line between courier and conspirator was no longer so clear. And Camille was now walking that line under a very hot light. As the afternoon session began, the mood in the courtroom had shifted again, this time toward fascination edged with unease. Camille Jordan's testimony had already stirred international chatter, but what came next would drive headlines into overdrive.
The Caribbean was about to take center stage.
Prosecutor Megan Avery rose once more, now holding a slim leather-bound folder. "Ms. Jordan," she began, flipping it open, "let's move to an incident you previously described in a sealed deposition.
Specifically, a 2018 trip to the Bahamas. Do you remember this?" Camille nodded. "Yes. Very clearly."
"Can you walk us through that assignment from the beginning?" Camille shifted in her seat, glancing briefly at the jury. "I received a call late one night, from Mr. Combs' operations manager. I was told to pack lightly and be at Teterboro Airport by 6 a.m. I didn't have a destination at first, just that it was island businesses and I would be briefed en route." The courtroom was silent, the atmosphere dense. Camille continued. "When I arrived at the private hangar, a jet was waiting. No logos, no manifest shown to me. Inside were two other individuals, one of whom was a man named Dante, who I later found out used to work for a private security contractor in the Middle East. The other was a woman I'd never seen before. Neither introduced themselves formally."
"And where did the jet land?"
Avery asked. "Marsh Harbor, Bahamas," Camille replied. "We were taken by unmarked van to a gated estate on the water. No signage, no obvious security. But inside, it was buzzing. Several people, staff, men in suits, crates being moved."
A murmur rippled through the crowd. Avery nodded.
What kind of crates?
Camille took a breath.
Large, metal, unmarked.
Some had security tags.
I asked if it was audio equipment for a video shoot. We'd done that before. I was told, very clearly, don't ask questions today. Did you handle any of the items yourself?
Yes.
I was handed 2 black Pelican cases and told to move them to a different room. They were heavy.
One had a lock pad attached.
I asked where to put them, and someone told me, Diddy's room, no one else touches those.
The jury looked tense.
One older juror shifted in his seat, scribbling a note. And Mr. Combs, was he present?
Camille nodded. He arrived later that evening. Came in on a separate jet. I saw him for less than 10 minutes. He was unusually tense. No small talk.
Just said, make sure everything gets back the way it came.
That's all. Avery leaned in.
Did he refer to the contents of the crates?
No. But he hovered near them constantly. Never let them out of his sight.
He even moved one of them to a closet himself, which was rare. Usually someone else handled logistics. And were there any interactions that alarmed you?
Camille hesitated. Yes.
At one point, 2 men got into a loud argument outside the villa. One accused the other of leaking drop points. I didn't understand the full context. But within 20 minutes, one of them was gone, vanished. I never saw him again. Avery handed Camille a document.
Do you recognize this? Camille examined it. Yes.
That's the guest manifest from that weekend. For the record, Avery stated, this manifest lists 9 names.
For our known business associates of Mr. Combs. 3 are still under federal watch.
And 2 have no clear identification. Can you confirm those names were present?
Yes, Camille said firmly. The courtroom buzzed again.
Judge Whitaker raised her hand, this time not to scold, but simply to restore calm. Avery then turned to visual evidence. We'd now like to enter into evidence 2 items. FAA flight logs from June 21, 2018, showing the inbound and outbound private jet traffic to Marsh Harbor, and aerial surveillance images provided by a third-party source showing large transport containers being moved to a dock at the rear of the estate. Camille confirmed both matched her memory. The photos, grainy but clear, showed nighttime activity, with individuals ferrying long crates to 2 waiting speedboats. And what happened when you left the island?
Camille's voice dropped slightly. We were told to stagger departure times. I left the next morning, alone.
When I reached U.S. Customs, a man I didn't recognize met me at the terminal and said, "You're pre-cleared." Straight through. I didn't even have my bag checked.
And who arranged that? She shook her head.
I don't know. Avery stepped back, letting the weight of that answer settle.
Then, the defense pounced.
Charles Brenner stood, this time holding a Bahamas tourism folder in one hand. Let's not sensationalize things, Ms. Jordan, he began. Isn't it true that Mr. Combs often held retreats or music events in island locations? Yes, but... And that many of these included security personnel, guest lists, equipment shipments, and last-minute travel. Yes. Then how is this trip any different? Camille looked at him, steel in her gaze. Because I wasn't told what I was moving. Because I was told not to speak to anyone outside of a closed circle. Because people vanished.
Brenner smirked.
You also said one of the guests was a former contractor in the Middle East. Can you name him?
I was told never to speak to him, she replied.
I don't know his name. Convenient. Brenner pivoted, now holding a printout of social media images. Is this a picture of you poolside that same weekend?
Camille leaned forward.
Yes, that's me. So, during this tense and cryptic mission, you had time for selfies and sunbathing. I was doing what I was told, she snapped. And trying to act normal. Or, Brenner said, you were attending a luxurious celebrity retreat and only now are painting it with dark undertones to stay relevant. Camille didn't respond.
He pressed on.
Did you ever open the crates?
No.
Then everything you've just testified, about the crates, the drop points, the missing man, is speculation, is it not?
Camille held her ground.
I didn't need to open them to know something was off. The judge called for another recess. Outside, speculation erupted. Photos of the villa surfaced, accompanied by satellite images, geolocation threads, and even deep-dive Reddit posts trying to match the mystery man Camille mentioned.
Inside, Camille remained silent. A storm was building, not just in court, but far beyond. And this trip to paradise might just become the prosecution's most compelling clue. When the court reconvened the following morning, there was a palpable sense of escalation. Camille Jordan's prior testimony had exposed mysterious travel, coded language, and untraceable packages, but now the case was shifting toward money. And money, unlike people or words, leaves a trail. Prosecutor Megan Avery stood once more, this time flanked by a suited man in his early 40s carrying a stack of ledgers and a laptop. His name, Ethan Reed, forensic accountant contracted by federal investigators. His role: to follow the money Camille claimed to have transported, concealed, or unknowingly facilitated. Ms. Jordan, Avery began after establishing credentials. Let's talk about payments, transfers, and the trail of transactions linked to your name or duties. Do you recall receiving wire instructions that weren't part of your regular duties? Camille nodded. Yes.
Between 2018 and 2020, I was occasionally asked to facilitate payments, usually in person, sometimes through wire transfer. The details were often sparse. I'd get a time, a city, and the name of the person who'd meet me. Were these payments documented through Combs Enterprises?
Camille glanced down. Not that I know of.
At least, not in the company's formal records. Avery turned to Reed. Mr. Reed, what did you discover when tracing these transactions? Reed tapped his keyboard and spoke into the mic. We found a pattern of cash withdrawals, offshore wire transfers, and deposits into shell corporations, many of which overlapped with Camille Jordan's personal travel records. He clicked, displaying a timeline on the courtroom's projector screen. Dots appeared across cities: Berlin, Geneva, Toronto, Miami, and Montego Bay. For example, Reed explained, on September 18, 2019, Ms. Jordan flew to Berlin. 3 hours after she landed, a cash withdrawal of €150,000 was made from a discreet banking service known for its ties to high-profile clients. The withdrawal was made under the name CJ Holdings LLC. This entity is now known to be a shell company set up less than 2 weeks before. Avery looked to Camille. Were you aware of a company called CJ Holdings LLC?
No, she replied, her voice tightening. That was never disclosed to me.
I never authorized the creation of any company. And yet, that company was tied to an account where large sums moved in and out, linked to your personal travel.
Camille nodded, barely audible.
I didn't know. Reed continued. We also discovered 2 other shell companies, Zircon Blue Enterprises and Nebula Trust, both of which received wire transfers from accounts associated with Mr. Combs' entities, often routed through foreign intermediaries. And were any of those accounts registered in Ms. Jordan's name?
Reed clicked again. Zircon Blue Enterprises listed Camille Jordan as a logistics consultant on one document. We believe this was done without her consent.
However, her signature appears on several internal records.
Camille stared at the screen, eyes wide. That's not my signature. I never signed those. Avery leaned in.
Did you ever give anyone permission to sign on your behalf?
No, Camille answered sharply. Never.
Not even once.
Judge Whitaker glanced over her glasses.
We'll need to verify handwriting analysis on those signatures. Mark that for review.
Avery nodded. Let's now discuss an incident in Berlin.
Ms. Jordan, you previously mentioned retrieving €150,000 in cash.
Can you describe that event?
Camille took a breath. I was instructed to meet a music executive, someone loosely tied to the label.
I was given a hotel suite number.
When I got there, the money was already in a leather duffel on the coffee table.
No conversation. Just a nod.
I was told to fly with it to Prague and hand it to someone named Lance. No last name.
Did you declare this cash? Camille looked down. No.
Did you keep any portion of it?
No. I was told explicitly not to.
I handed it over, as instructed. Avery let that statement linger before continuing. Did you ask what it was for?
Yes,
Camille said. I was told it was for a fashion deal, a European warehouse.
But when I followed up later, no one would answer.
The fashion line never appeared. The name changed monthly.
Reed interjected.
We attempted to trace this warehouse project. No property purchase, lease, or registered company under the associated names exists in any European business registry.
The courtroom murmured again.
Camille pressed her palms together in front of her mouth, like she was holding back a scream. What about domestic activity?
Avery asked Reed. Reed nodded.
Between 2019 and 2020, multiple wire transfers totaling $2.4 million USD were sent from accounts associated with Combs Holdings to offshore entities tied to Ms. Jordan. At least $600,000 passed through an account listed at a Delaware bank under a slight misspelling of her name, Camille Jordan. It is unclear whether she was aware of this.
Camille blinked hard.
I was not. That is not my account. The jury sat motionless, some with pens frozen in midair. Avery closed in. What is the significance of financial activity being tied to a person without their knowledge? Reed answered, it allows plausible deniability. If a transaction is questioned, the response can be, my assistant handled it. Meanwhile, the paper trail leads back to someone who doesn't have the full picture. And Ms. Jordan, did you ever receive unusual notifications from banks?
She nodded. Yes.
In late 2020, I got a letter from HSBC regarding activity on an account I didn't recognize. When I brought it up, I was told it was a clerical error. That happens, I was told.
And did you believe that?
I wanted to. Avery paused, then rested her case for the day.
Brenna rose like a vulture circling a wounded animal.
So you're claiming that, despite being Diddy's personal assistant, despite flying first class around the world, despite being trusted with confidential errands, you never knew about any of this financial movement in your name?
I'm saying I trusted people, Camille said. And I shouldn't have. Brenna nodded.
You trusted them, until it was more profitable not to.
Objection. Sustained. He switched gears.
Isn't it true that after you left Combs Enterprises, you met with a publisher about a potential memoir?
I explored it, Camille admitted, but it never went anywhere.
And what was the proposed title?
Camille closed her eyes.
Invisible Hands.
The jury took note. Court adjourned.
That night, financial experts on cable news dissected the testimony like bloodhounds. Social media was ablaze with screenshots of the alleged shell companies, and Twitter threads popped up attempting to link Zircon Blue Enterprises to suspicious real estate buys in Dubai. Camille Jordan, once just an assistant, was now being compared to whistleblowers and fall guys alike. But one thing was clear, the money trail wasn't clean. And wherever it ended, it was pulling Diddy, and Camille, into deeper and darker territory. The courtroom was quiet when proceedings resumed the following morning. Reporters outside spoke in hushed tones, microphones ready but restrained. Everyone sensed that the trial had reached a turning point.
The money trail had been damning.
But now the focus was shifting to something far more elusive, secrecy.
This was the chapter where the silence itself would be put on trial.
Camille Jordan stepped back onto the stand, noticeably wearier than in previous sessions. The whirlwind of headlines, trending hashtags, and late-night punditry had taken its toll. Still, she sat upright, composed, a folder in her lap that had already drawn attention. Prosecutor Megan Avery stood again, this time holding a black binder with 3 color-coded tabs. Ms. Jordan, she began, do you recognize this?
Yes, Camille replied.
That's the NDA packet I signed during my time with Mr. Combs. For the record, Avery said, addressing the judge and jury, this packet contains 3 non-disclosure agreements, each signed at different points in Ms. Jordan's employment, 2016, 2018, and 2019.
Judge Whitaker leaned forward.
Are these verified as authentic?
Yes, Your Honor,
Avery confirmed. Signature matches confirmed via prior deposition. Avery then approached Camille. Can you explain the circumstances around the signing of the first NDA in 2016?
Camille nodded. It was part of my onboarding.
I was told it was standard, just to protect business interests, celebrity privacy, that sort of thing. I didn't think much of it. And the second NDA? That came after I was promoted to executive assistant. There were clauses about travel, discretion, and logistical confidentiality. I asked a few questions, but I was told to either sign or consider a different future. What do you mean by that?
Avery asked. Camille paused. I took it as a warning.
Not a threat exactly, but not a suggestion either.
Avery flipped to the 3rd tab.
Now, let's focus on the 2019 NDA. The language here is far more aggressive. Did anything significant happen that year to prompt it?
Camille inhaled deeply. Yes. There was an incident at a warehouse in Miami. Something went wrong. I wasn't supposed to be there.
I walked in on a meeting, late at night, between Mr. Combs and 3 other individuals.
2 of them I didn't recognize.
They were arguing about a shipment that hadn't arrived. There was a strong chemical smell, like industrial cleaner or worse.
A ripple of whispers moved through the courtroom. And what happened after that? I was escorted out by security.
The next morning, I was given the 3rd NDA and told that if I ever spoke about what I saw, it would be irreversible.
That was the word used. Avery raised an eyebrow.
Irreversible consequences.
Yes, Camille said.
And when I asked for clarification, I was told, let's not find out what that means.
The courtroom fell deathly silent.
Avery continued, flipping to page 3 of the 2019 NDA. This clause here reads, the signee agrees to refrain from disclosing or implying any knowledge of Combs-affiliated operations, regardless of legality, scope, or personal involvement. Did that raise any red flags for you at the time?
Yes. But I didn't feel like I had a choice. I was already too deep in it.
My rent, my lifestyle, my security, it all depended on that job. Avery nodded. To your knowledge, were other employees made to sign similar documents?
Yes.
Especially those who traveled frequently or were present at priority events. And were these NDAs ever enforced?
Camille looked down. Yes.
In 2018, a junior assistant tried to leave the company and speak out about something. She received a cease and desist letter within 48 hours. Then, mysteriously, a non-compete clause surfaced in her contract that none of us had seen before. The defense team stiffened, sensing danger. Do you believe these NDAs were used to silence wrongdoing?
Yes, Camille said flatly. They weren't about protecting privacy. They were about protecting power.
Avery gave the jury a moment before stepping back. No further questions. Charles Brenner rose slowly from his chair, smoothing his tie. Let's talk about those NDAs, Ms. Jordan. You're claiming you were forced to sign legally binding documents against your will.
I was pressured, Camille clarified.
There's a difference.
Brenner smirked.
You're a college graduate, yes. Yes. You've worked in legal-adjacent environments.
I've worked for people who had lawyers.
So you're telling us you didn't know how to say, I want to speak to an attorney?
I did.
But I also knew what happened to people who made noise.
Ah, he nodded, pacing. Fear.
That's your defense.
No, Camille shot back.
Reality.
Brenner then pulled a printed screenshot from a gossip website.
Is this your comment posted under pseudonym in late 2021, discussing a potential memoir about escaping celebrity corruption?
Camille winced.
Yes, that was me. So you were already preparing to monetize your experience, long before this court ever called you to testify.
I was looking for a way to make sense of what happened, she snapped. A memoir.
A payday.
No. A warning.
Brenner tilted his head, flipping the page. And this email to a publishing agent where you pitched the title The NDA Files.
Camille's voice cracked. That was never pursued. It was a draft. I was scared.
You were opportunistic.
Objection. Sustained. Brenner moved on.
Do you know how many NDAs are signed every day in the entertainment industry?
No. Thousands. And do you know how many of them are criminal? No. Exactly. Because NDAs are not admissions of guilt.
They are contracts, voluntarily signed by consenting adults.
I understand that, Camille said.
But I also know when one's used as a muzzle.
Brenner paused, letting that final word linger before returning to his seat. Judge Whitaker announced a recess. Outside, Twitter exploded.
The NDA files began trending, while legal experts debated the enforceability of NDAs involving potential criminal activity. TV panels featured split-screen debates, one side defending confidentiality in business, the other arguing Camille had exposed a systemic abuse of silence. Inside, Camille sat motionless. She had cracked the veil wide open, not just on one man's empire, but on an entire culture of sealed lips, legal threats, and whispered warnings. The air inside the courtroom felt heavier than before, tense and expectant. Camille Jordan had already dragged financial secrecy and legal silencing into the open. Now, she was set to describe the one figure who, until this point, had remained a shadow at the edge of every whispered story, Diddy's head of security, a man known simply as Big Rome. The prosecution called her back to the stand for a supplemental round of testimony, this time joined by a new face in the courtroom, a federal investigator who had compiled surveillance footage and communications logs. But the real weight would be carried by Camille's words. Prosecutor Megan Avery began without fanfare. Ms. Jordan, we've talked about payments, non-disclosure agreements, and logistical operations. Today, we want to focus on a specific person who, based on your prior testimony, appears to have played an enforcement role within Mr. Combs' organization. Do you know a man by the name of Romel Jackson? Yes, Camille replied, her voice tighter than usual. Everyone called him Big Rome. And what was his role? Head of security, she said. But that title doesn't capture the full picture. He wasn't just bodyguard muscle, he was also the gatekeeper. The fixer. The one you didn't cross. And how often did you interact with him? Often. Almost daily during tour seasons or private events. Avery paused. Can you describe the incident that occurred in Tulum, Mexico, in July 2020? Camille looked up at the judge, then down at her hands. Yes. Please proceed. We were there for what I was told was a wellness retreat for influencers. Diddy had rented out a villa compound. One night, I was asked to deliver a package to a man staying at a neighboring resort. I was told it had to be done quickly and discreetly. I was late, by about 30 minutes, because I couldn't get a driver. When I got back, Rome was waiting. Waiting where? At the gate of the compound. I didn't even make it up the drive. He stopped the car, pulled the door open, and told me to get out. What did he say? He said I had jeopardized an entire operation over nothing and that I was on my last chance. Then he handed me another package and said, You don't open this. You don't ask about this. You just move. Did he threaten you? Camille looked around the room. He didn't have to. The look on his face was enough. Avery tapped her tablet. A still image appeared on the projector, grainy nighttime surveillance from a roadside camera. It showed Rome and Camille at the rear of a vehicle, 3:07 a.m., a silver package in Rome's hand. Is this the moment you referenced? Yes, Camille whispered. That's it. Where did this footage come from? A third-party surveillance unit stationed near the property. Mexico's security network isn't centralized, but this camera belonged to a resort 2 blocks away. They turned it over after we requested footage tied to a separate investigation. The image lingered for effect. Avery resumed. Did you ever learn what was in the package? No. And did you open it? Camille shook her head. Never. I was told very clearly, if you open it, it's over. Who told you that? Rome. And another staffer, Marcus, who handled regional coordination. But Rome was the one who enforced everything. Avery narrowed her eyes. Did Mr. Jackson ever act violently? Camille hesitated. Not in front of me. But people talked. There were stories. Stories. About Rome threatening people, both inside and outside the team. About him roughing up someone backstage once during the Bad Boy reunion tour. About a photographer who disappeared after snapping something he wasn't supposed to. Avery leaned back. And yet, Mr. Jackson is still employed by Mr. Combs. As far as I know, yes. Did the staff ever question his authority? No. If Diddy was the king, Rome was the executioner. No one crossed him. Avery allowed the weight of that statement to hang before concluding her questioning. Then the defense stood, already flipping through notes with dramatic flair. Charles Brenner approached Camille, slow and calculated. Ms. Jordan, he began, you've painted Mr. Jackson as some kind of enforcer, bordering on criminal. Is that correct? I've described what I experienced. You're aware that Mr. Jackson is a former Marine, honorably discharged? Yes. That he has no criminal record? Yes. So your entire depiction is based on a few glares, a late-night interaction, and second-hand stories. Camille tightened. No. It's based on years of watching how he operated. People walked on eggshells when he was around. Maybe they respected him. Maybe they feared him. Brenner smiled. Tell me, do you have any documentation of these threats? Any messages? Recordings? No, she said. Nothing I was ever stupid enough to keep. So it's your word. And that grainy image. That's what we're relying on. Camille didn't blink.
That's what you have. But I know what happened. Brenna stepped closer.
Were you aware that Mr. Jackson has been subpoenaed to testify next week?
Camille looked startled. No. He'll have a chance to respond to everything you've said.
Are you prepared for that?
I am. The court fell silent again. Brenna returned to his seat, satisfied with the discomfort he'd sown.
Judge Whittaker took a moment before calling for a recess. As the court emptied, social media erupted. #Big Rome trended within minutes, and amateur sleuths began combing through past images of Diddy's entourage, attempting to identify the man now cast as a silent enforcer. A single frame from a 2019 Grammy afterparty, Rome flanking Diddy, unsmiling, circulated as if it were a mugshot. Some media outlets called him the gatekeeper. Others dubbed him Diddy's fixer.
But Camille knew better.
He wasn't the one with fame, money, or legal protection.
But he was the one everyone feared the most. And the courtroom wasn't done with him yet.
By the time Camille Jordan took the stand again, a new energy had infected the courtroom. Her testimony had stretched across several days, raw, detailed, and increasingly viral. But on this day, things would shift. The prosecution's case had been steadily mounting, but now the defense was ready to strike back. The media outside called it Judgment Day for the witness. Inside, it felt like something more clinical. The moment Camille's credibility would be dissected, line by line.
Charles Brenner stood with renewed confidence.
His desk was littered with printouts, transcripts, and one manila folder with Camille's name written in bold black marker. "Ms. Jordan," he said, rising slowly, "we've heard you speak in detail about your duties, your fears, and your accusations. But now it's time to test those claims." Camille sat upright, bracing. Brenner opened the folder. "Let's begin with a 2023 podcast interview you gave, under the alias CJ Reeves."
"Do you remember that?" Camille blinked.
"Yes. In that interview, you stated, and I quote, 'I never saw anything illegal.
I just had bad feelings.'
But vibes aren't evidence."
"Is that accurate?" Camille hesitated.
"That was before I came forward. I was still scared. I wasn't ready." "So you lied?" "I downplayed the truth." "Lied," Brenner repeated. "You said you never saw anything illegal, and now you're here alleging cross-border cash drops and chemical-smelling warehouses." "I was trying to protect myself," Camille snapped. "I wasn't ready to lose everything." Brenner smiled, sensing her discomfort. "So what changed? Did someone offer you immunity? Or maybe, a platform?"
"No," she said firmly.
"I came forward because I couldn't keep the secret anymore."
Brenner pulled another document. "Let's talk about your timeline."
"You testified that in July 2020, Big Rome threatened you in Tulum. However, we have a passport log that places you in Toronto that week."
Camille stiffened.
"That's not right. It's official." She looked to the judge.
"There may be a mix-up.
I took several trips that month. I might have flown to Toronto from Mexico or vice versa."
Brenner raised his brows.
"You might have?"
"You're the one claiming to have been threatened.
Shouldn't that date be burned into your memory?"
Camille's face twitched, but she said nothing.
The jury shifted.
Brenner wasn't done.
"In your deposition, you claimed to have witnessed a heated exchange between Mr. Combs and unknown men in a Miami warehouse. Yet in a 2022 sworn statement to a private investigator in a civil case, you stated you were never present at any off-site meetings."
Camille's mouth opened. Closed.
"I wasn't ready to tell the truth back then." "You weren't ready," Brenner repeated mockingly. "Ms. Jordan, you've said you were afraid, unprepared, manipulated. Is there any version of this story where you take responsibility for your own contradictions?" "I didn't make up what I saw." "But you did change your story."
"I had to," she said, her voice cracking. "I had to because I finally realized what I was part of. I finally found the courage."
Brenner delivered his final blow. "Did you or did you not sign a letter of retraction in 2022 disavowing your original claims about Mr. Combs?"
Camille closed her eyes.
"Yes.
I signed it."
"Under pressure." "And who pressured you?" "I'd rather not say." No further questions. The courtroom sat in a thick silence. The cracks had shown. Camille's certainty had splintered. Her timeline now held questions. Her motives, blurred. Prosecutor Megan Avery stood quickly, knowing damage control was needed. "Ms. Jordan," she said softly, Is it true that you were contacted multiple times by Mr. Combs' legal team between 2021 and 2023? Yes. And were you offered any money to remain quiet? Yes. How much?
200,000. I turned it down. Gasps from the gallery.
Even Judge Whittaker looked surprised. And after turning it down, you received a cease and desist letter and were threatened with legal action if you spoke? Yes.
Avery walked slowly.
Ms. Jordan, why not go along with the silence? Why sit here today, exposing yourself, contradicting your past statements, risking everything? Because I'm not the same scared girl I was then, Camille said, her voice trembling but steady. Because the truth deserves to breathe, even if I've stumbled trying to speak it. Do you believe everything you've said here under oath is true?
Yes.
I may have faltered, but the core, the heart of what I've seen and lived, is real.
Avery Saturday.
The judge called for a short recess. As Camille stepped down, her face was a mask of mixed emotions, wounded, angry, and quietly defiant.
The courtroom buzzed again. Some jurors looked sympathetic.
Others scribbled furiously. Outside, media coverage turned chaotic. CNN aired a segment titled Camille Crumbles. Twitter split down the middle, #I stand with Camille versus #Camille contradicts. A TikTok of the retraction letter went viral, with armchair analysts dissecting the signature.
But inside the court, something more nuanced was happening. The jury had seen both the strength and the scars.
They'd seen inconsistencies, yes, but also a witness weathered by fear and pressure. A woman who may have tripped over the truth on her way to revealing it. Camille returned to her seat, clutching a tissue.
She wasn't done yet. And neither was the storm.
The final day of Camille Jordan's testimony didn't begin with a bang. There was no breaking news alert or shock video leak that morning, just gray skies above the courthouse, a few scattered protesters outside the gate, and a subtle unease inside the courtroom.
Something was ending.
Or beginning. Inside, the jury looked different, less guarded, more weary. They had been dragged through conflicting accounts, coded messages, offshore accounts, and psychological pressure.
Now, they were here to hear Camille's closing words.
Judge Whittaker took her seat promptly at 10 a.m. We will now hear final remarks from witness Camille Jordan. Counsel may ask limited follow-up questions following the statement.
A hush fell.
Camille stepped slowly to the stand, her heels quieter than usual, her notes clasped tightly in one hand.
She didn't look at Diddy's legal team.
She didn't look at the cameras, or even the judge.
She looked directly at the jury. My name is Camille Jordan, she began.
I was 24 when I joined Combs Enterprises.
I wanted to be part of something big. I was good at my job. Efficient. Loyal.
I didn't ask questions because I didn't want to be seen as difficult. I didn't want to lose everything I thought I'd earned.
She exhaled and looked down briefly.
What I didn't realize was that keeping my head down didn't protect me, it trapped me. I became part of a machine I didn't fully understand.
I carried bags without knowing what was inside. I took calls on burner phones.
I flew across borders with sealed envelopes, some of which I now believe were tied to illegal activity.
I was asked to sign away my silence. And for years, I complied. She looked up again.
But silence became a burden. Because I wasn't just carrying luggage, I was carrying secrets. Secrets that had weight.
The room was utterly still.
I know I've made mistakes.
I've contradicted myself. I've lied to protect myself.
I've said too little, and now I fear I've said too much. But what I haven't done is invent the fear I felt every single day working in that environment.
Camille's voice trembled.
You've heard about the NDAs.
The packages. The offshore transfers. The men like Big Rome. The missing names. The silence.
And now, I need to say this plainly, I was loyal, until it became dangerous. She stepped back, her hands trembling as she returned to her seat.
The judge turned to both legal teams.
Brief response from prosecution. Avery stood. The witness has been honest about her inconsistencies, but consistent about her core truth. We ask the court to consider not only what she saw, but what she risked to say it.
Then, the defense. Brenner rose, surprisingly calm. We agree. She's been inconsistent. We rest on that.
The judge nodded.
Thank you.
The court will now move into deliberation preparation. As court adjourned for the day, Camille stood alone by the side wall, silently collecting her things.
No press questions. No spotlight. Just the quiet dignity of someone who had finally stopped running. Outside, the world responded. Twitter erupted.
#Camille Speaks trended globally within hours.
News outlets scrambled to get interview requests in. Podcasts dissected her statement line by line.
Cable news showed side-by-sides of her walking into court day one and leaving now, visibly changed. Public opinion split. Some called her a brave whistleblower, a cautionary tale of what power can do unchecked. Others called her inconsistent, opportunistic, someone chasing a second chance at relevance. But one thing was undeniable: she had forced people to look. In the days that followed, the case evolved. Prosecutors revealed that Camille's testimony had opened several new investigative avenues, including into shell companies and encrypted communications that might involve far more people than previously known. One source claimed a federal subpoena was already drafted for a former logistics manager. Another hinted at IRS interest in the Cayman wire trails Camille described.
And Big Rome? He never testified.
His legal team filed a motion citing concerns for personal safety.
His current whereabouts, unknown.
As Camille returned to her apartment, a modest place in Queens where media trucks lingered like vultures, she received a letter. It was from an anonymous former assistant in the music industry. It read, "You gave us a voice.
Thank you."
Camille folded it carefully and placed it in the same drawer where she once kept her burner phones and travel schedules.
That night, she didn't turn on the news.
She didn't scroll Twitter.
She sat in silence.
For the first time in years, it didn't feel like a prison.
It felt like peace.